let's talk about AMD. What did I title this? I titled this, I think it was Thank You Gigabyte. Yeah. And the reason I did that, around AMD news was because, Gigabyte are having a bad time with it. I think, Al, you said they had some sort of PSU
Yeah,
issues as
it's all
well.
over the news outlets with exploding PSUs, but yeah.
Yeah, terrible. And they were also part of a ransomware attack. And as a consequence of that, they had a load of AMD news leaked because obviously they didn't pay their fee. Now, what seems to have come out is that and I'm just going to go through. It's a mixture of specs and other, I think, notable items. Zen 4 will have, by the looks of things, double the amount of cache, versus Zen 3. Yeah, that just means more performance. I think in terms of AMD, they seem to have always done well with their kind of cache designs and architecture. Yeah, and they've leveraged a lot of performance out of that. AMD CPUs look as if they're also going to start supporting AVX 512, which is exactly what Intel are now taking away from Alder Lake. And the reasons to have AVX 512, and again, it's really, I feel there's a limited kind of types of workloads you can maybe use it for, but it seems to be more about AI, 512-bit math operations. So you've just got, you know, pretty wide kind of operations you can run, and there's certain workloads that benefits. But effectively, they could be the only product on the market, the consumer market, that supports it. Weirdly, on the server side, AMD look as if they're going to be going up to 96 cores, plus 12 channels of DDR5, which is kind of insane. This is for their Genoa range of CPUs, which is the successor to EPYC. And the reason I kind of call this out is that, generally speaking, right, that's probably an indicator that AMD have not stopped pushing the amount of cores. Yeah, they've not stopped pushing the amount of cores. We can potentially see more even on the consumer space. Their general strategy with PCIe 4 and 5 is, well, it looks like they're sticking with PCIe 4 for the foreseeable future, but they're providing more lanes of PCI 4, which ultimately means you can connect more PCI 4 devices rather than having kind of bigger lanes, if you like. Which I think in the shorter term makes kind of sense. I mean, to be quite honest, we're only now seeing more PCI 4 storage devices. Yeah, we know that PCI 4 GPUs don't really saturate that interface. Yeah, it's not a deal breaker at all. And it's going to be expensive. That's the other thing to consider. iGPUs are going to make an appearance on Zen 4 and AM5. And AMD RX 7000, the next iteration of GPUs, is going to feature both RDNA 3 and RDNA 2, which is kind of weird,
Hmm.
but also possibly going to be a good thing for the consumers. So, Al, any thoughts on your end? Those nuggets of
Yeah,
information.
I'm wondering if they're reusing. I wonder if they're reusing some old chips that they've got residual somewhere, or the not so good ones, and shoving it in as an iGPU. It'd be interesting to see what performance you can get out of them as well. And
Yeah,
yeah, they'd be rolling out all their APUs as well anyway. So it's just like, well, do they really need to do this? But
yeah. I don't think it works that way for iGPUs though, Al. I think it's got to be
mm,
part of the kind of CPU die. They can't. I don't know if they can modularize stuff like that, to be honest. But I take your
mm,
point. I think that it's a bit interesting on the kind of RX 7000 side of things, because they're mixing and matching. My only hope with that is,
yeah.
I don't care they are, but if they're doing it because they want to basically sell people cheaper GPUs, I'm all for that. If they're not, I'm not for that at all.
Mm.
Because there has to be some upside to the consumer and the gamer.
Yeah, and it's good hearing about the cache and stuff like that, and kind of pushing the boundaries more on the PCIe connector and using as much as we can out of it, really. So,
They're the
but
cash kings, as we know. Infinity
Yeah.
Cache or Infinity whatever it may be, right? I mean, and then Vcache, which I'm you're hearing rumors that I mean I think they're talking about Vcache enabled Zen 3 chips coming out maybe Q1 next year, but it would not
Mm-hmm.
surprise me if AMD brought out some
The
products
yeah.
for the end of this year to coincide when all the Lake basically launches, and I'm thinking only their kind of high-end chips, just to
Yeah.
basically have that positive kind of like
Yeah, I suspect they would have, well, prior to the leak, I guess they would have kept this in their back pocket for somewhere. It feels like a Q2, Q3 next year, right? Why would they? I can imagine they would just like slowly squeeze Intel bit by bit as Intel tries to catch
Yeah,
up.
I mean, apparently Vcache has been there for a while.
Mm,
It was actually there or thereabouts when Zen 2 came out, actually, but they never kind of rolled it
mm,
out. And you know, AMD doing all sorts of interesting things in their packaging. The stacking for the caches, the different modules they're piecing together. It's like Lego almost. So it's really
yeah,
interesting
yeah.
stuff.
But probably, I guess, with any leaks, is always take it with a grain of salt,
Yeah, yeah, well,
or large pinch of
a
salt,
big
maybe.
bag of it. You know what I mean? But it's like, but some of this stuff is not that far fetched. I mean, if you ask me, it's not
Mm.
outlandish. You always take it with a pinch of salt. But the actual thing that I think I would kind of be skeptical on more than anything is the iGPUs.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, the iGPUs themselves. But I mean, we'll see. They're moving to this AM5 socket, which I apparently gives them a bit more power delivery. So you can imagine
Mm-hmm.
that's a factor, but we'll see. Now AMD, they are not standing still.
And that's a good thing. That's a good thing because we were getting a little bit worried that they could, but it seems like they're not behind the
Yeah,
scenes.
yeah, they're kind of arming up. Let's put it that way. They know what's coming, you know. Again, I will say thank you, Gigabyte.
What do
Thank
you
you.
what do you guys think is the next kind of breakthrough that all of these manufacturers need to get through, where the order of who's the most strongest is really going to get tested again?
It's a difficult thing to answer, really, because generally speaking, I think for the next 5 years, I think it's going to be the regular, performance versus power. Power being power consumption. I think we've always based things on those metrics.
Yeah,
Can we go faster by
Yeah.
consuming less power? Because if you consume less power, then you generate less heat. You generate less heat. Your CPU or whatever piece of silicon can run at that clock for a little bit longer. Yeah,
yeah,
and I don't think that's going to change. But
Mm.
what I kind of see people doing now is being a bit more innovative with how they put the different components together. It's like the packaging thing we just discussed. AMD are gonna do a lot of this stacking for their caches. I know Intel are looking at that. And effectively, what that really means is that if you look at a chip, right, the die space, you've got an X by Y chip. The reality is you can only put so much on there. And what the fabs have been doing, they've been improving their processes so they can make the chips a bit more dense. They can put more on there.
yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
Obviously you're gonna get to a point where it's the land of diminishing returns, right? So instead of building kind
Yeah.
of like on a 2D space, you kind of like build on the kind of 3D space. That's where I think the next area of competition is going to be. Who's going to innovate more than
yeah.
that?
It will need to be some kind of new type of metal materials that they build on. Either they go even smaller, or they get better. But because this is it's the laws of thermodynamics. They're restricted on that,
Yeah,
and some of that is restricted by the materials, right?
I would agree.
Yeah. And at some point, graphics fidelity will get to a point where it's pointless to go any further. And I think
Yeah,
we're getting close, right? You can see it with 4K TVs and that sort of stuff. You get to a point where we probably won't need any more.
Yeah,
So then, what else?
I think it'll move away
Um,
from resolution. outright resolution. I
Yeah,
think
exactly. Yeah.
people will kind of look at what they can do with a pixel. I mean, it's really bad way of saying it, but if you look at typically a game, right? I mean, you got your resolution, sharpness of the scene and whatnot, but ultimately you want to, you want a lot going on in that scene, you know, and maybe that's what they kind of gonna have to look at. It won't be a resolution play. It's just about how much can you kind of push in terms of what's going on in the scene. Stay at 4K for God's sake, right? Or go for 8K if you have to, right? But really, how many particles can you push? How dense?
Oh,
Yeah,
yeah. Most games are still on 1080p.
yeah. Thank you. Yeah, they are. I mean, generally speaking, I think for silicon, I think it'll be kind of packaging tech, stacking. It's just how much more you get out of that real estate, and I mean, that's for me, that's the 5 year thing, and beyond that, I don't know. I mean, I don't know enough about this stuff, but I mean, people talking about materials that are about replacing silicon.
Yeah, and
That's that sort of thing.
and Jay, on your question, I think also now that you've kind of forced the question, I think I was thinking around the green aspects of actually gaming. Actually how much whether we can actually calculate the kind of a green efficiency of playing certain games or not, or a counter kind of factor really, because of if you want to do you want to downscale your game just to make it more green because you're consuming less power?
Yeah.
Yeah, no, that's interesting. Really interesting point. I always, I know, as much. I know I'm an Apple fanboy, right? And I know clearly you two aren't, right? But
I am actually.
Okay, maybe okay. As much as people shit on them, sorry for cursing, but in that closed garden, they drive quite good efficiencies across all the software layers, on whether it's closest to the actual user or to all the layers on the hardware. And I really wonder how much efficiency will be gained from, like, let's say, NVIDIA working more closely with Windows and, let's say, the Unreal Game Engine 5 or what's coming out, and then even the developers who use Unreal Engine 5, they can really squeeze out even more performance versus having more layers of translation, in the same way that Apple has control over those layers they own, right? And
Definitely true. I mean, they're able to tune for a well-defined set of hardware.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, and no matter what you say, that's going to yield different sorts of results. If you look at the consoles, something like a PS4, that thing had anemic CPU hardware and it was launched, let alone 7 years later.
I remember. It's amazing we can get out of that hardware.
Exactly. It's absolutely amazing. I mean, I'm amazed at some of the first party games, but they were smart, right? I mean, I think I'm wrong to say they actually pioneered asynchronous compute on the graphics card. They certainly made it very, very popular, and I think that was because they knew the kind of CPU was a bit anemic, and they needed to shift as much onto the GPU as possible, and that's why you're getting that sort of level of performance, out of it. So I kind of think walled gardens, it's not open. Doesn't speak to a lot of people who love kind of computer tech, but you can't argue with the results. You can't argue with the results.
But I guess what I'm saying is, like, using those good principles, because again, Apple is so big, has so many departments all having to work together. I'm saying outside of the Apple ecosystem, the chip manufacturers and all that layer stack all the way up to the game developers, whether they could work even closer together. I mean, when anything gets optimized, it's diminishing returns as well, isn't it? They'll give up at some point where the cost versus the benefit isn't worth it.
Yeah, you almost have to go back to basics then and re-engineer the whole thing, just to avoid those layers that you've created.
Yeah, it's going to be time and money, though, isn't it? At the end of the day, if you think about, if you've got a fairly restrictive, defined set of kind of hardware, CPUs, GPU combinations, even down to the drives, because someone like Apple probably puts the same drives or the same SSDs or flash memory across all of their products, and they have very defined known metrics that a developer can work against. Yeah. Whereas the Windows ecosystem, damn, you've got PCs that are probably kind of 15 years old running some of this stuff. Who knows, right? And then you've got to make all of this stuff work. Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah.
It's a multiplier. It's an absolute multiplier. If you had all the money in the world, you could absolutely do this, and all the time in the world, I should say. But this is where I think PC gaming to get the best results, you are having to brute force. You are the brute force solution, whereas the consoles, you're the efficiency optimization solution.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
And that's where the difference lies. And I think Apple falls into that camp as well.
Yeah, it's a really good point. Really good point. Just the other thing I wanted to just quickly, because we're running quite long, this could sound like a complete left field thing, but if I look at FIFA, right, then FIFA 22, they're talking about this hypermotion thing, right? Whether beyond the marketing, right, I can see a use case where you're playing a football game and you're only controlling one character, but they've used AI to just take lots of video recordings of football games and the kind of player behaviour. They could use AI they could use all that stuff to the AI generate random behaviour in the game, right, to make it feel more authentic, because you're only controlling one person really, one character at a time, right, or maybe two or three around them, or the rest of it just. But all the micro hand movements and micro body, just to make it feel more real. I just feel if you strip away a lot of games and the good graphics, right, not just FIFA, but other games, it's fundamentally the game models and what they're doing is quite simplistic. And I know there are games out there where they're doing more things, but it's on rails, prescripted animations or gaming models. And I really think like there's going to be a lot more compute power into games that opens up it feeling more real, but you're not actually interacting necessarily with everything on the scene. And I think that's where maybe the use case could really drive and maybe a new architecture or a new model that all these manufacturers go into. It's just a blue sky thinking for me, but that's just where
it's interesting. That plays into kind of AI and the like, because I mean, for me, when I think about stuff like that, I think to myself, you boil down a game loop. Yeah, game loops sound quite simple, but then you tack on the hundreds, if not thousands, of events that could happen in a given game, and then games are getting more and more complicated in terms of the feedback to the gamer and what their expectations are. There's a kind of overhead of doing all of that, if you know what I mean. Like you're playing a football game. In the old days, you would basically have every sprite would look exactly the same, whatever the football game was, right?
Yeah.
No individuality. Every player behaved the same way, yeah. And and there were a limited amount of responses. If you tackled someone, that's it. Same like, tackle done.
Yeah.
There's no layers. There's no layers.
Yeah.
Yeah. But now our expectations are totally different. We want the little idiosyncrasies. We want the nuances of the thing. Yeah, we want to see all of that.
Yeah.
Right. Even to think about something like that and capture something like that is a hell of a lot of work in my view.
Well, they've got the groundwork. I mean, I think football games are interesting where they've got the, how should I say, attributes. Each kind of player character has already sets of attributes, but it's obviously not necessarily characteristics, which probably what an AI ML model could potentially do. But it's a lot of processing to make that kind of an actual character's characteristic.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know enough about the technology as such, but I mean, I just kind of think that there must be a certain tedium of basically having to handcraft some of these things. If you had to kind of handcraft and build the logic for 1,000 events that could happen in game, something like that, right? And based off a model where you're controlling a character and his interaction with another character, even if it's just kind of like a football game, and then can you reduce that tedium on the workload on a developer if you had some sort of AI model? If you had kind of like a model or an understanding of how a human skeleton might work, for instance. You have physics models in there, all interacting with and the AI is just kind of doing stuff to mesh that together. I mean, that for me is quite interesting, right? I mean, where it's in the realms of science fiction, I don't know. I don't know nothing about the technology.
I think it's gonna head that way, right? Because I mean, if you look at like Unreal 5, we should probably have a conversation about another time, right? But I don't know if you've seen any of the clips, but what they're doing with the kind of not ray tracing hardware, but the equivalent in software, they're allowing developers to use the same database of assets used in movies. They built software that auto-generates NPC characters, right? That's all of those things are taking a lot of the monotony and load off of developers, and I can see the same thing happening for animations and fluidity of characters in football games or whatever it is, a first-person shooter. You're still going to need the artist to then still create the
yeah, of course.
But there's probably there must be a lot of tedious, monotonous things as part of developing code, and there's just a few people that do the really exciting stuff, right? And I think
the art and everything else. I think,
and it's gonna have to come, because as games get more expensive, all of that stuff is going to happen, and I think that's where probably the crossover with like you said, it has to be AI driven. I don't think AI is being properly used, and I think it's got infinite amount of potential, but the use cases haven't driven, and some of the stuff we're talking about now, I think will drive some of that change.
And I think you could do it with a football game. That's quite enclosed with 11 by 11 players, or you can call it 10 by 10 if you keep just on field players and stuff like that, right? But I think football is perfectly possible, and it's interesting. And maybe we could have a separate topic which talks about bots, because AI and bots in certain games, you can tell the difference when it's not well programmed. It actually affects the gameplay how shoddy some AI and how little effort some developers have actually put into their AI. And I'm talking more bots than the kind of AI ML kind of modeling stuff, but actual bots within a game that compete against you, or at least tries to be your NPC, right?
So it's an interesting thing, right? Because AI is such and I'm not an expert, right? But I don't think it's necessarily used in the right way, because people, I'm not saying you guys have on this call, but people could take the intelligence of a NPC in a game and say, "Oh, that's AI." But is that AI? Is it really thinking for itself, or is it just a bunch of a model with branches that a code has created? Because
that's pretty much what it is.
You see what I mean? AI in my head is something that's a bit more dynamic, and it's learning and improving as it goes along. Because the new Halo bots are apparently meant to, when they did a test flight, I don't know, it was a month ago or something, where it was only bots. The bots got smarter every day, and they were starting to mimic the players, even to the point of doing teabagging. Oh no!
Yeah, and I was going to say also Dota is an interesting one, where actually the bots have been so advanced now, they've come up with new mechanics that players have not even identified. It's got to a point where it's actually insane. There's some of the stuff that they've been doing, but it is through AI, ML, brute forcing patterns. Like it's just over time to be able to create some of these rules and some of the things that they're picking up. But yeah, it's definitely a separate topic. We can't.
Truly is the. I think we should all do it. I mean, it truly is the undiscovered country, isn't it? Really, and I kind of will say, I mean, that no matter what's done, we want people to create better games. Games are getting more and more expensive, more and more complex. The scope of games is expanding all the time. Hell, if developers can use this technology, and people say they're cheating, just cheat. But just get out a better game. Everybody's happy. I think it would be interesting. I mean, this is definitely another topic for discussion. We could go way deeper into this, do a bit more research around this. So Jay, thanks for bringing that up. That was an interesting conversation, I think.
Yeah, nice.
With our AMD topic turning into more of a AI machine learning, future state of gaming kind of topic. Let's move on.